Alright, Kai Play, I'm Bob de Schutter, and this is my contribution to the workshop. I am challenging you all to design games for an aging player. Or, well, no, I mean, how about this? I'm challenging you all to design awesome games for an aging player. Because, I kind of have a bias when it comes to designing games for older adults, which started back in 2004 when I actually got into this field. Because, back then I read this paper, a Dutch communication science paper on how older adults use television. And the conclusion of that paper was that they used television because they were lonely. They used television to alleviate boredom, to find diversion, and for parasocial interaction. And in case you're not familiar with that term, it basically means an illusion of social interaction between themselves and the fictional characters they see on screen. Now, reading that back in 2004, I thought that was pretty strange because in 2004, knowing video games, we had things like World of Warcraft. And World of Warcraft had millions of people playing at the same time in 2005. So that's kind of weird to me because, why would you be lonely in the age of World of Warcraft? Why would you pick the bold and the beautiful over online gaming? Well, that was quite the riddle, and I thought, well, maybe they don't have internet access. Yeah, that's got to be it. I mean, digital divide and everything. But then I'm like, well, we have pretty good single player games like Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2 was released in 2001. It's still one of my favorite games of all time. I mean, it looked realistic, it conveyed strong emotions, it's well crafted, it's thought provoking, and well, sure, it's a horror story, but it's a horror story that uses psychological transformation of the main characters to generate horror as opposed to cheap thrills. And people have even written theses and dissertations on the topic of Silent Hill. I mean, it's a proper game, and there's plenty of games at that time that, had that type of an experience for their players. So that communication science paper just signaled a huge disconnect for me between the media that were out there and how older adults were using these media. Now, since then, a lot has changed, especially when it comes to games and aging, and our academic research on the topic has grown exponentially. Which is great because, as an academic community, we have found that video games can do a lot of great things for older adults. Some games can improve your physical and cognitive functioning. Other games stimulate social well-being, maybe even World of Warcraft, and there's games that provide therapeutic support and so much more. But on the other hand, this kind of positive effect research has also coincided with another phenomenon. Games that are solely about their potential positive effect on the user. Games that are trying to exploit the fear of growing old and demented. Think about the Brain Age, Big Brain Academy, Lumosity. It's all the same story, and it's the opposite of why I got into this field as a designer. Now, to make matters worse, the research consensus on these games is that we don't have compelling evidence that the brain training games are actually working. In fact, there's even some research that demonstrates how regular commercial entertainment games have better cognitive outcomes than brain training games. So, brain games are pretty much marketing, and while this might change in the future, for now they are mostly hot air. And that's a huge problem in my opinion, because similar to how the marketing of pink games pushes materialism to young girls and can be detrimental to their confidence, while brain training games are pushing the idea that you are useless to society if your brain has gotten too old. The former is criticized for being sexist, the latter should be criticized for being ageist. And ageism is making it hard for older adults to start playing games. I had numerous participants in my own research talk about how it's socially unacceptable for them to play games. Some of them told me that they ran through the house to hide the Game Boy whenever a friend would visit, or how they would use Bible quotes to defend while they're still playing games. People think I'm getting demented because I play these games. I had one of the lady participants tell me in my research. So, that's really bizarre to me. Why do we applaud a 70-year-old that's obsessed with chess while we look down upon the same person if they would be obsessed with Pokemon? And the answer to that question is ageism. And ageism also extends to the industry itself. At the 2015 Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, a group of veteran industry game designers started to raise awareness about ageism in the industry. Their key statistic was that only 1% of game developers is over 50. One lousy percent. How are we going to make games that are generally interesting to older adults if the industry is so much younger than them? How are we actually going to make games that are accessible to them? I can tell you the answer, we're not. We have a long way to go to make games that are accessible to aging players, and knowing those benefits of playing digital games in later life, that's really scary to me. Because no matter in what good shape you might be in the day, there's a day that you will have an age-related disability. One that might prevent you from using a gamepad, from hearing audio cues, or even turning on the console. So we really need to change how we look at games and aging. And that's why Vero van den Abele and I wrote a first draft this summer of what could become a proper manifesto for design for older adults and games. So let's look at our 3 principles that should inform game design for older adults. First off, we argue that we need playfulness over usefulness. A lot of authors have discussed the intrinsic value of games. Say, Chris Crawford talks about how game playing is vital educational function for any creature capable of learning. Janet Murray states that games let us enact our basic relationships to the world, enact the patterns that gives meanings to our lives. And Frank Lance at the GDC was talking about how games are supposed to be decoupled from actual purpose, because then we can find meaning and beauty in them. Now, if we focus on injecting games with external uses, external purposes, external goals, we are risking all of this. Just think about how much it sucks to play an educational game when it's overly educational. The Game-Based Learning Society has struggled with this for decades, so the games and aging community should not repeat the same mistake. So let's make games that can be played for their own sake, first and foremost. Trivial maybe, but definitely fun. We should design for playfulness. Number 2. Growth over decline. The reason for this is that we disagree that games and aging should all be about cognitive decline, like those brain training games. And there's research to back this up. Take the work of Paul Baltz, for example. He advocated how aging is not just decline, but also growth. Older adults come up with new strategies to overcome decline and improve in areas that they're still good at. Media researchers like Margot van der Groot have shown how many older adults are using media not to compensate for losses, but how they're using it selectively for content that's actually meaningful to them. Finally, what if by 2050 medical advances make this entire issue go away? And it's all about getting good entertainment out there for older adults. So it's definitely something that's on my mind right now, and I would say it's actually not that difficult to do, because games, like I said before, they do a very good job at being meaningful. And players are often willing to learn and grow by playing games. Games can be eudaimonic. So we should design for personal growth first and foremost, alongside great accessibility. Point 3. We need to design for a heterogeneous audience instead of a stereotypical one. As with any age group, there is a lot of diversity amongst older adults, physically, intellectually, culturally, and as people age, they have different life experiences. They become more unique, and they respond different to life events. So if you look at the audience research, this is actually replicated. You will find a lot of different types of gamers amongst older adults, and making games for older adults in general is not the way to go. We need both content and customizations to support a wide range of players. So, for example, typically we would state how older adults do not like violence in media, and so don't make violent games, but well, watch them play GTA 5 or Diablo 3. I've done this in my own workshops. You'll reconsider quickly. Those games do have violent content, but they're fun, and older adults still like to play them. And that wraps up our 3 principles. Playfulness over usefulness, growth over decline, and heterogeneity over stereotyping. And these 3 principles can lead us to many exciting places. For example, Recordis by the TU of Delft and University of Mannheim is a playful turntable designed for Alzheimer's patients. It helps them to recall memories, to interact with each other and feel good about themselves. So it's fun, it's playing music, it's playful, it emphasizes growth. Interact with each other, feel good about yourself, and it's not stereotypical. DJing turntables is not something that you typically think of when you think about older adults. Blast from the Past is a Nintendo Wii game that has grandparents and grandchildren explore their cultures together and learn from each other. Again, it's first and foremost all about fun. It's a Nintendo Wii game. It's swinging that controller around. It's answering interesting trivia questions. And it's also about growth, about learning new things, instead of just lingering with the old. And because of that, it's not stereotypical. Finally, I love Age Invaders. It's an intergenerational social physical game that you play with 3 generations together on a big LED board. Just the entire setup is not the first thing that I think of for when designing games for older adults. And again, it's about growth, it's about connectedness, it's about bringing people together and not stereotyping them. So my point is that we have made a lot of cool stuff, but I believe that we can still do better. And that brings me to indie games. Because today we have so many thought-provoking, emotionally moving games out there that are aimed at mature audiences and that provide meaningful media content. And that's exactly where I see the connection with older adults 20 years from now. These games are typically not about reaction speeds, although there are exceptions, but they are always about playfulness, about growth, about meaning. And they do not expect anything of the player and are highly accessible. Furthermore, they are pushing the boundaries of what a game is, and that's often mind blowing. And I'd say having things that are not stereotypical like that are just a really good thing, especially if you're trying to avoid Alzheimer's. So that's what I wanted to contribute to the workshop. Thank you so much for listening, and now go out there and make some awesome games.